I begged him to stay. He said he would. But every touch felt distant, like I was being pitied, not loved. How do you tell the difference before it's too late? 3 weeks later, I found the answer on his phone, and it wasn't meant for me. He still held me every night, his arms wrapped around me, same as always. Same position, same weight, but it didn't feel like before. It felt careful, like he was touching me out of memory, not desire. Like he was afraid to let go too quickly, in case I noticed he already had. I noticed anyway. There's a difference between holding and staying. He was doing the first, not the second. Sometimes he'd rub my back absent-mindedly, like he was checking a box. Other times, he'd just rest his hand there, motionless, like the barest contact was enough to maintain the illusion. And I'd lie still, trying not to shift or breathe too hard, afraid any movement would remind him how far away we already were. I used to fall asleep fast with him next to me. Now I'd lie there counting each exhale, trying to decide if he was actually asleep or just pretending to be. That's how far gone we were. I'd started doubting his breathing. I think the scariest part wasn't that he felt distant. It was that I couldn't tell if he was trying anymore. Some nights, he'd kiss me before rolling over, a soft press to the forehead, polite, non-committal. And something about that kiss, it gutted me more than silence. Because it said I'm still here, but it felt like I don't know how to leave yet. One night I whispered, "Are we okay?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Yeah, of course." That pause told me everything, but I didn't push. Because the only thing worse than hearing him lie was hearing him tell the truth. There's a kind of grief that starts before anything is over. A knowing. It builds slowly, layer by layer. Until you're no longer asking if something's wrong, you're just wondering how long you're supposed to pretend it's not. That was where I was, in his arms, lying beside him, and already losing him. 3 weeks earlier, I stood in the hallway gripping his shirt like it was the only thing anchoring me to the world. He hadn't even said he was leaving. Not really. He just started pulling back, a little quieter, a little harder to reach. I could feel the space widening between us like a draft under a closed door. So I did what people do when they're scared. I begged. "I don't want this to fall apart," I said. His hands were at his sides, not on me, not reaching. Just waiting. "I'm not asking for everything to be perfect. I need to know you're still in this, that I'm not the only one trying." He looked at the floor, that blank, unreachable stare. Then he put his hands on my arms and said, "I'm not leaving, I'm still here. I need space." "Space," I repeated, "in the relationship." "Yeah, not from you, just inside it. I need to breathe without feeling like I'm failing." It was the kind of sentence that sounds thoughtful until you hear it out loud. Then it lands like a slow withdrawal wrapped in self-help language. I nodded, said okay, tried to believe him. But even as he pulled me into a hug, I could feel how slack his arms were. No pull, no urgency, just a gesture. Like someone comforting a child they're too tired to explain things to. That night, I curled into him like always. But I cried into the back of his shirt when he fell asleep. He said he was staying, but nothing about him felt present. The hard truth I wouldn't admit yet was this: he was already half gone. He just didn't want to be the one to open the door. So instead, he handed me the keys and waited to see if I'd lock it behind him. Camille didn't say, "I told you so." She never did, that's not her style. Instead, she tilted her head to the side, took a sip of her drink, and asked, "So let me get this straight. He's still your boyfriend. But emotionally, he's taking a sabbatical." I laughed, not because it was funny, just because it was the only thing I could do that wouldn't make me cry. "It's not like that," I said, even though it was exactly like that. Camille raised an eyebrow. "You said he needs space inside the relationship. What does that even mean?" I shrugged. "He's just going through a lot with work, with life." She leaned forward. "And you? What about me? Are you allowed to go through a lot? Or do you just keep the lights on until he finds his feelings again?" I didn't answer. She let it sit. We were at her apartment, legs curled up on opposite sides of the couch, an old movie playing on mute in the background. She didn't press. Camille never pressed. She just asked the kind of questions that made your silence feel louder than a scream. "I'm not saying he doesn't care," she said finally. "I'm saying it's starting to sound like you're the only one working overtime to keep something from breaking." I stared at the wine glass in my hand, The rim had smudges. I hadn't even taken a sip. He said he's not leaving, I said. Sure, but has he arrived lately? I laughed again. It caught in my throat. I hated that she was right. I hated that I needed her to say it before I could let myself admit it. There's something about Camille. She doesn't need to yell to wake you up. She just holds the mirror still enough that you can't look away anymore. That night, I went home, crawled into bed beside Eli, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. His back was to me. He mumbled something in his sleep. I didn't ask what it was, because I already knew it wasn't for me. I started counting the seconds, not out loud, not with a stopwatch. Just in my head, 1, 2, 3, every time he hugged me. Every time his arms went around me and I waited to feel something. Warmth, pull, anything. Most nights, he held me the way people hold jackets they forgot they were wearing. Lightly, absently, out of habit. His hands used to wander not sexually, just naturally. Fingers tracing the curve of my back, palm pressed to my stomach, thumb brushing the inside of my wrist. The kind of touch that says, I know you. I want to know you again. Now it was clinical, shoulder to shoulder. No movement. No grip. Like he was holding me because not holding me would have required a conversation he didn't want to have. Sometimes I'd shift, try to tuck myself into his chest the way I used to. He didn't pull me closer. He didn't pull away either. He just let me settle wherever I landed. There's something devastating about that, when someone stops making choices and you realize indifference is the answer they won't say out loud. I started timing our hugs. 3 seconds, 4 max. He used to linger. Used to kiss my temple. Used to exhale like I was the safe place he didn't know he needed. Now he patted my back. A pat, like a friend. Like a there gesture you give a coworker who's had a bad day. I didn't say anything. Because saying it out loud would have made it real. So instead, I started hugging him first, just to see if he'd match it. He never did. And that told me more than words ever could. We used to talk about the future like it was already happening. Vacations we couldn't afford yet. Apartments in cities we hadn't visited. Tiny, dumb details, like what kind of mugs we'd have, whether we'd get a dog or a cat first, who would be in charge of the grocery list. It wasn't serious planning. It was play, but it meant something. Lately, he didn't play anymore. Now he talked about deadlines, back-to-back meetings, how his team was really picking up steam. I'd ask how work was going, and he'd talk for 10 minutes straight without once mentioning how he felt about any of it. Just metrics, just stress. One night, I brought up a trip we'd talked about months ago, a weekend cabin upstate. Something quiet, something simple. He smiled, polite, detached. Yeah, maybe when things settle down. They never settle down. That's the trick. Life doesn't pause just because you want to feel something again. I tried again the next week. Asked if we should look at moving when the lease was up. We'd outgrown the space, not just physically. He said, let's wait and see where things are at. I nodded, but something inside me clenched. We used to dream in when. Now everything was if. He wasn't making plans with me. He was keeping options open. That's the thing about detachment. It doesn't always come in a dramatic exit. Sometimes it's just a slow shift in language. A quiet recategorizing of the relationship from future to maintenance. He was still showing up, but he'd stopped building, and I was pretending I didn't notice. It started with his phone, not the content, not at first, just the way he began treating it like a second pulse. He used to leave it face up on the nightstand. Used to scroll absent-mindedly while we watched TV, sometimes showing me memes or screenshots mid-sentence. It was casual, open, normal. Now it was always face down, always locked. The screen dimmed faster. The alerts were shorter, vague. A message preview that used to say, Camille, wanna meet at 6? Now just said message. He changed his lock screen wallpaper too. It used to be us, a blurry photo from a beach trip where we were both laughing, hair tangled, wind in our faces. Not perfect, just real. Now it was a black and white cityscape. Abstract, cold. Like something pulled from a stock image folder labeled ambition. I didn't say anything. Because the moment you ask, the moment you voice it, you can't take it back. The dynamic changes. You're no longer just wondering, you're accusing. And I wasn't ready to be the accuser. So I watched. I watched the way he'd tilt the phone slightly when I walked into the room. how he'd shift it under a pillow or take it with him to the bathroom even if he was just brushing his teeth. I told myself it was work, that he was stressed, that people evolve and maybe this was just part of the shift. Maybe I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew the difference between privacy and secrecy. And this wasn't about boundaries. It was about walls, ones I hadn't noticed him building until I was already on the outside. Her name was Tess. I remember because the first time he said it, it sounded casual, like someone dropping a placeholder into a sentence. We're working late, Tess is helping with the numbers. I nodded, didn't think twice. Everyone had coworkers. Everyone had work friends. Everyone vented about deadlines and group projects, and Tess is the only one in that office who doesn't make everything harder. It didn't register as anything. Not then, but names that don't matter don't usually show up again. And Tess did. She started appearing in passing, brief mentions during dinner, vague references in stories that didn't really need a supporting character. Tess figured out the spreadsheet thing. Tess gets it, she's the only one who actually listens. I started to hear her name the way you start to hear your own heartbeat in a quiet room. You don't notice it until it's the only sound. One night I asked casually, "Are you too close?" He looked up from his phone and shrugged. "We just work well together." That was it, not really. Not we're friendly, but it's nothing. Just a shrug, a closed door. And I'm not proud of it, but I filed it away. Started clocking the frequency. The way his face changed when he talked about her, not lit up exactly, but alive. Like she was a person who gave him oxygen when I hadn't even noticed he'd stopped breathing around me. There was no evidence, nothing tangible, just a name, repeated. Too often, too lightly. Like something being smuggled into our story, one line at a time. It was my birthday. Not the actual day, the dinner. The part where I'd planned something small, told him about it 2 weeks in advance, texted him a reminder the night before. He showed up late, 23 minutes to be exact. I know because I checked the time twice, then stopped pretending not to. He walked into the restaurant with flowers. Bright, slightly wilted, wrapped in cheap plastic from the convenience store down the street. He was still a little out of breath. "Sorry," he said, leaning in for a kiss I didn't meet halfway. "Work ran late." I smiled, not big, just enough to be polite. "It's fine." The food was already cold. The server reheated it. I said thank you. Eli didn't apologize again. He just slid into the booth like nothing was off. We made small talk about Camille's latest dating story, my brother's new job, a movie we both knew we wouldn't watch. The whole time I kept thinking, this is what it feels like to sit across from someone who's already made up their mind. He was there, but he wasn't with me. I didn't cry. I didn't snap. I didn't bring up the lateness, the flowers, the fact that this entire night felt like something he was obligated to check off his list. I just thanked him, quietly, carefully, and something in me calcified. Because birthdays aren't about the gesture, they're about effort, memory, the proof that someone holds you in their mind with care, not just convenience. And this felt like pity. Like going through motions to avoid the guilt of not going through them. I walked home ahead of him. He didn't notice. That night, I put the flowers in a glass because we didn't own a vase. By morning, they'd already started to brown. The apartment got quieter before I did. I used to hum while making coffee, play music while folding laundry, narrate things out loud to myself when he wasn't listening, half a joke, half a need. But lately, I found myself tiptoeing. I didn't realize it at first. Just noticed I was turning lights off sooner, speaking softer, choosing silence over sound. Like I was afraid of making noise that might reveal how empty things had gotten. Eli started going to bed earlier. Sometimes by 9. Sometimes with his phone clutched in hand like a sleeping pill. I'd come home late and find him turned away from the door, lamp off, eyes closed or pretending. I stopped asking if he was asleep. I stopped asking anything, really. My hours stretched longer at work, not because I loved being there, just because it gave me something else to be absorbed by. An excuse not to be in a room where my presence felt like background noise. I used to rush home to him. Now I sat in my car outside the apartment complex scrolling nothing, watching the clock. Waiting until it was late enough that I could reasonably walk in without needing to talk. Inside, the air felt stale, unmoved, like a space recently vacated even though no one had officially left. His shoes were by the door. His jacket draped on the couch. The signs were all there, except him. When we did speak, it was surface level. Did you eat? Yeah, how was work? Busy. No follow-ups, no warmth. Just two people cohabiting a memory. I started doing my laundry separately. Grocery shopping in smaller quantities. Leaving on lights in rooms I wasn't in, just to make it feel like someone else might be. The silence wasn't dramatic. It was maintenance. Survival. An echo of everything we'd stopped saying out loud. Camille dragged me out on a Thursday. I'd said no twice, told her I was tired, that I had emails to catch up on, that Eli and I were maybe going to watch something. She didn't buy it. Neither did I, she texted. You're not tired, you're disappearing, be at my place by 7. I showed up at 7:12. No makeup, hoodie, flat expression, she didn't comment. Just handed me a drink and pulled me to the couch. There was music playing, not loud, just something with a beat that reminded me I had a body. That I used to move it for fun, for no reason at all. She didn't ask how things were, she asked, do you remember how full you used to be? I didn't answer, she tilted her head. Before all the holding your breath stuff, before you started waiting for someone to notice you were drowning. Still, I didn't answer. Because when someone holds up a mirror that's sharp, the first reflex is to look away. Camille leaned back, sipped her wine, and added, I'm not trying to pull you out of anything you're not ready to leave. I just don't want you to wake up 6 months from now and not recognize yourself. It landed, not hard, just low. Quiet, true. I looked down at my glass, my chipped nails. My reflection in the coffee table, dim, tired, small. When did I start shrinking? Not overnight, but slowly. In concessions, in silences, in all the ways I kept choosing peace over presence. That night I didn't cry, I didn't vent, I just let the music play. Camille didn't push. She just stayed beside me until I started to remember the shape of my own life, the one I'd paused to hold someone else together. I didn't mean to snoop. That's what people always say, but I mean it. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a trap. It was just a Tuesday night, quiet, unremarkable, and he'd left his laptop open on the kitchen table. I was cleaning up, wiping crumbs off the counter, my glass still half full from the wine I hadn't finished. The kind of night where nothing feels urgent until it suddenly is. The screen was still lit. A tab open, Gmail. He was in the shower. I could hear the water running, the familiar creak in the pipes. And then, without thinking, my hand reached for the trackpad. It opened easily. I didn't need to guess the password. It was my middle name. That part hit first. The irony, the misplaced intimacy. Even now, with everything fraying, with every part of him pulling away, he was still using my name to lock something up. I didn't even feel guilt at first, just curiosity, or maybe something closer to survival instinct. The inbox was clean, too clean, not many personal messages, a few notifications. A reminder to update something for work, then I clicked sent. Not because I expected anything, just because that's where things hide, and I saw it. A message chain, titled with no subject, the kind that doesn't need one. The most recent email was short, casual, from Eli to Tess, just 2 lines, no punctuation, no emojis. I needed that. Today especially. You always make things lighter. The message below it was longer, her response. I didn't read it, not yet. My stomach dropped, not in shock, in confirmation, because I hadn't been looking for proof he was cheating. I'd been looking for proof that I wasn't crazy, and there it was. His password was still my name, but everything else in that inbox was hers. The thread wasn't long, just a few messages spaced out over time. But the tone was unmistakable. The kind of rhythm that doesn't happen by accident, the way people speak when they've been circling something without saying it. It started innocently. Of course it did. Little check-ins. Notes about shared projects. Complaints about meetings. Then slowly the shift from thanks again to I don't know what I'd do without you. From good luck tomorrow to wish I was there to see it. The kind of sentences that live just beneath the surface of something else. But it wasn't until the 4th message down that I felt my breath catch. Eli's words, I wish I'd met you sooner. I read it twice, not because I didn't believe it, because I did. Because it confirmed everything my body had already been screaming at me in silence for weeks. Every distant touch, every nod without follow-up, Every time he smiled when he said someone else's name, I didn't need pictures. I didn't need hotel receipts. I didn't even need to know if he'd crossed the physical line. He had crossed every other one. An emotional affair isn't about sex. It's about choosing someone else in the moments that were supposed to be yours. And that message, that wasn't a flirtation. That was a wish for a different beginning with her. I sat back in the chair, let the screen go dark. He was still in the shower, still humming something out of tune, still unaware that the final thread holding us together had just snapped quietly, without drama. He hadn't just stopped loving me, he'd started loving someone else. The timestamp was what broke me. The message, "I wish I'd met you sooner," was sent at 10:42 p.m. same night. He held me in bed and whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." I remember because I had been staring at the ceiling, trying to calm the storm inside me, and he'd rolled over, kissed my shoulder, and said it softly. Like reassurance, like a lullaby for a child who couldn't fall asleep. I had whispered back, "Okay." But nothing in me had believed him. Now I had the proof. He had said I'm not going anywhere minutes after writing that to her. After choosing someone else emotionally, intentionally, and then coming home and offering me false comfort like it was enough to keep the foundation from cracking. I stared at the screen, at the date, at the minute-by-minute timeline of betrayal. The lie hadn't been just in what he said. It was in the precision of it. The performance. The fact that he had written that message with his own fingers, sent it with a clear mind, then crawled into bed next to me and touched my skin like it still belonged to him. There's something cruel about that kind of closeness. Not because it hurts more than distance, but because it disguises the exit as affection. That night hadn't been an ending, it was a pivot. He'd already turned, I just hadn't seen it. Until now, I didn't say a word. I logged out, closed the laptop gently, and walked back to the bedroom where he was already asleep or pretending to be. Either way, I didn't care. I lay down beside him. On my side, facing the wall. The bed felt colder than usual, not physically, just in the way that people can bring a chill even when they're inches away. I watched the red light of the charger blink across the room, listened to the hum of the fridge down the hall, counted how many times he shifted in his sleep. 3. At one point, he reached for me, barely. His hand landed on my hip. I didn't move, didn't pull away, didn't lean in. I stayed still and let it sit there like an empty gesture, a relic from a time when it meant something. I didn't confront him the next morning, didn't slam doors, didn't yell, didn't throw the laptop across the room or leave the inbox open like a trap. I made coffee, poured him a cup, set it down by his keys just like always. He thanked me, kissed my cheek, and I let him. Because when you see something that shatters the illusion, you realize there's no point in forcing the reveal. You don't need to burn it all down. You just have to stop pretending it's a house worth saving. So I waited. Not because I was unsure. Because I needed the clarity to settle inside me first, before I walked, before I left anything behind, before I told the truth with my absence instead of my voice. I lay awake that whole night. Not grieving, just finally seeing everything as it was. I called Marcus the next afternoon, not because I wanted to explain, I just needed somewhere to land. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey," I said, voice steady. "You good?" "Not really. You need to get out." "Yeah." A pause, then, "I'll leave the porch light on." That was it, no questions, no digging, just the kind of love that doesn't ask for a play-by-play. He knew the difference between drama and damage. And he knew that if I was calling him not Camille, not anyone else, it was serious. I packed light. One bag, just essentials. The clothes I actually wear. Laptop, toothbrush, charger. I looked around the apartment like it was a museum of someone else's life. My life, before I stopped recognizing it. I left his favorite mug on the counter. The one I hated, oversized, chipped, always in the sink. It felt like a small act of rebellion to leave it behind, unwashed. I didn't plan a speech. I just wrote a note, 2 words, you knew. I folded it once, left it on the bed, didn't sign it, didn't explain, because he'd know what it meant. And if he didn't, that said enough too. I locked the door behind me, didn't look back. The porch light was on, just like he said. Marcus opened the door without a word and took my bag. He didn't ask where Eli was. He didn't glance at my face, searching for damage. He just stepped aside and let me walk in. That kind of care, the quiet kind, feels rare when you've spent months shrinking yourself to make room for someone else's silence. The couch was already made up, blanket folded, pillow fluffed in that crooked way that says someone tried, even if they didn't know how to make it look perfect. I sat down, took a breath. He handed me a glass of water, sat across from me, turned the TV on to something neither of us cared about, and that was it. It didn't need to be deep. It didn't need to be explained. It just needed to feel safe. And it did. He asked once gently, "You okay to talk about it?" I shook my head, he nodded. "Then don't." We watched half an episode of something before I said anything. It wasn't about Eli. It was about the weather, then a memory. Then something about our mom's terrible lasagna. We laughed once. Short but real. That night I fell asleep on his couch in a shirt that wasn't mine, in a space that didn't demand anything from me. No performance, no explanation. Just the soft weight of being somewhere I didn't have to prove I deserved to stay. He noticed. I knew he would. The next morning, when I didn't come home, when my side of the bed stayed empty, when the apartment was too quiet, too still, too easy to clean, he noticed. But he didn't call. Not that day, not the next, just silence. I didn't wait for him to, didn't sit by my phone, didn't rehearse how I'd respond. I let the stillness fill the spaces he used to occupy. Let it say everything he wouldn't, because people who care might mess up, they might fall short. But they don't stay quiet when you disappear. They don't go 2 nights without reaching out. They don't treat your absence like relief. And that's what this was. A slow confirmation of everything I hadn't wanted to believe. That maybe, deep down, he'd been waiting for me to leave first. Because then he wouldn't have to explain anything. He could just say, "She left." And I had, not to punish him, not to teach him a lesson, but because I finally understood that silence can be an answer. And his spoke louder than any apology ever could. Camille showed up 2 nights later with a bottle of wine, a tote bag full of snacks, and her laptop like she was moving in for the weekend. "I figured you needed a reboot," she said, kicking off her shoes. "And I refuse to let you sink into post-breakup hermit mode." "I didn't break up with him," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Did you go home?" "No." "Did you tell him you were leaving?" "No." "Then yeah, you did." We didn't talk about Eli much, not directly. She mentioned him once, a quick, "He didn't deserve the version of you that tried so hard." Then she moved on. She queued up old photos on her laptop. Us in college, blurry bar selfies, one of me in a ridiculous feather boa at her 30th birthday. I laughed. Genuinely. And for a moment, I remembered what it felt like to be someone with edges. Someone with color. Not this hollow, careful version I'd been rationing out for months. We drank wine, passed a bag of kettle chips back and forth, and argued over playlist songs like we were 20 again. I didn't feel whole, not yet, but I didn't feel empty either. That was something. At one point, she looked at me serious just for a second and said, "You didn't lose him, he let go. You just finally stopped catching him." I didn't respond. I just poured another glass and let the music fill the spaces where pain used to echo. The first call came on a Sunday. I was folding laundry on Marcus's couch, stacking shirts that didn't really matter if they were wrinkled. The TV was on in the background, some nature documentary I wasn't watching. The phone lit up. Eli, I didn't move, watched it ring. Let it go to mist. 10 minutes later, he called again, then again. The fourth time, he left a voicemail. I didn't listen. Just stared at the little red bubble, thumb hovering, then moving past it. I thought I'd want this, that moment when he reached for me and I had the power to say no. But it didn't feel like power. It just felt quiet. Like he was knocking on a door I had already locked, not because I was angry, but because I wasn't home anymore. He didn't text, didn't follow up. Just that one voicemail, sitting unread in my inbox like a leftover apology. And I realized something. I didn't need to know what it said. I didn't need answers. I didn't need closure. I just needed to keep not going back. Because that, more than anything, was the decision. Not silence. Not a final message. But choosing myself every time he asked me to reconsider. The question haunted me for weeks. How do you tell the difference between love and pity? It echoed in every moment I replayed, every kiss that felt like an obligation, every hug that ended too soon, every soft word that sounded rehearsed. I kept thinking there had to be some test. some definitive signal that would separate affection from guilt, that if I'd just been sharper, more aware, I would have seen it coming. But sitting there, coffee in hand, the morning sun creeping through Marcus's living room window, Camille snoring softly in the next room, I finally knew the answer. You don't feel like you're disappearing inside of it. That's the difference. Love makes you more of yourself. Pity asks you to shrink. Love holds space. Pity fills silence with empty gestures. Love is there even when it's messy, even when it's hard. Pity just performs care long enough to keep you from noticing how alone you've actually been. I hadn't lost him. I had lost myself trying to keep him. And now, I was done keeping anyone who needed me to go quiet in order to stay. I took a sip of coffee, heard birds outside the window, no phone buzzing, no doors creaking open, just peace. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Thank you for watching. Please do not forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I love you all.